Do you ever wonder why you're doing what you do in life? Do you wish that you could be really happy and passionate about what you do? Or maybe you already are and you want to expand in a different direction. Hi, I'm Barbara Ann, host of What the Why? I love what I do. A lot of that has to do with my story, my journey to this point in life. And guess what? Everybody has a story. So please join me for conversations with leaders from all walks of life about what they do, and more importantly, why they do it, how they found their core purpose, their passion, their mission in life. And if you're looking for your own, maybe you'll get some great suggestions on how you too can find your why. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of What the Why. If you're new to us, welcome to all of our new Apple and iHeartRadio listeners and viewers. Our show features conversations with diverse leaders from all walks of life about why they do what they do and how they figured things out. Maybe you're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, or you want to get unstuck, whether that's in your career, your job, or just in life in general. All of our guests have something in common with you. At some point, they felt either similarly or they went through some type of a pivot in their life and they figured out things for themselves. And today's guest really is no exception. I'm really excited to introduce you to Maria Costanzo Palmer. She's an author, speaker, home cook, and nonprofit professional. For those of us in the nonprofit world, she's her own version of a triple threat. Just last year, she was named one of LA Weekly's top 15 rising authors to watch for her debut co-authored book, On the Rocks. Her book even snagged a feature in Forbes as a must-have gift for all those entrepreneurial spirits on your holiday shopping list. The book has received critical acclaim for its interesting voice, and as it's written in the first person narrative in her father's voice, which you're going to learn some very fascinating things about. The book racked up several awards, like the American Bookfest Award for Narrative Nonfiction in 2023. It even scooped up the 2024 New York Book Festival's Book of the Year. So she's a fascinating story. I'm really excited to interview her. So without further ado, please join me in a round of applause in welcoming Maria Costanzo Palmer to our show. So yay, welcome, 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 welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So your journey is very fascinating. And so before we jump into what you're doing now, I don't imagine you thought you'd be doing it. So when you were growing up, what did little Maria want to be?
I really didn't know, but I did reference for this question an old, I don't even know if it was a yearbook because I don't think we had yearbooks at that time. But it's so funny because I would not want to be either. Well, I said I wanted to be three things. Two out of the three are an absolute no. The one I think I kind of am. So I said I wanted to be either a politician, which is certainly a total no now, especially
Yeah.
a model, which clearly is also a total no. Barely, if I at one point in my life hit like 5'4.5", I would be very lucky. And the third thing I said that I wanted to be was a public speaker. I don't even think I knew what that meant at the time, but that is actually something that I do now, which is kind of cool. But what's interesting is whenever I wrote that growing up, I was the shyest kid in the class. I really didn't talk to anybody. I was scared to death of adults, especially. So the fact that I could even think that I would be a public speaker is beyond me because that was definitely not my personality growing up.
And I can really empathize with that. I mean, I was in that era where I was afraid to dial zero to talk to the operator to try and get a phone number. And to go from there to even doing something like this is kind of like, wait, what? How did that same kid get to this? And so how did you get from this really shy person who was almost afraid to say anything to being a public speaker and a published author? I mean, and you have had quite the journey.
Yes, I will say that life is very interesting and it gives us a lot of twists and turns, some of which we can plan for and try for, and others that are just handed to us. And I would say in my journey, it's really been the latter. It hasn't been the plans that I've made in my life. It's kind of been what life has planned for me. That being said, whenever I was 4 years old, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I grew up in a very small, little subset of Pittsburgh, just a little bit west of the city, in a city in an area called McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. Nobody's really heard much about it other than if you're a football fan. About 3 years ago, Damar Hamlin from the Buffalo Bills collapsed on the
Mm.
field and he was in a cardiac arrest. He is, in fact, from the city of McKees Rocks, and his mother's daycare, which he raised, I think, close to $9 million for whenever he was fighting for his life, sits across the street from what once was my family's restaurant, the Prima Donna. So when I was 4, my dad left a very stable job as a postal worker and he bought this restaurant business in a rough and tumble type of town, not one that you would go and frequent restaurants in. And he, with a lot of blood, sweat, and so many tears, I'm sure, he was able to turn it into one of America's hot spots. And that in itself was its own little journey, because this was before the time of this type of thing. There was no social media. There was radio, but certainly not iHeartRadio and Apple and all of that. It was, very much just broadcasted, one or two stations at that time. And he was able to really, but just by word of mouth and a lot of letter writing, convince some people to come down that really made a big impact and kind of helped to take him to another level. um, I learned very early on that this was my dad's passion in life, and this is where he not only needed to be, but where he wanted to be. So, as a child, I remember him missing out on a lot, um, for us, for the family. He, in the time that he was in the restaurant, I don't think he ever went to one wedding reception. He would go to the ceremonies and then just go directly back to work. That's how focused and that's how important this job was to him. It was more than just a job. It was a way of life and a way of touching and impacting not only the customers, but certainly the people that worked for him. And I was lucky enough to be one of those people that worked for him whenever I was in high school. Before then, I definitely did some little, salt and pepper filling and ketchup filling and, pretend waiting on people. But that's really whenever I started to understand the business and what he did, and also the magic behind the restaurant. And I enjoyed working there for several years throughout my high school career, and then on breaks and during the summers whenever I was at Syracuse University. And unfortunately, this is kind of where my story takes a sudden turn. there had been a lot going on, enough to certainly write a book about.
Hmm.
But my father's name was mentioned in a federal grand jury investigation. Not that he was the subject of. Somebody else was the target of this investigation, and they were told, hey, if you give us the name of somebody else who would be a person of interest, we can sort of forget about this. And of course, that was appealing to that person for a number of reasons. But I think uh, as I have kind of lived this journey, it was most likely fear. I used to think that the number one motive was being vindictive. And it may have been part of that, but I really do think, kind of now being the yogi that I am, we're all rooted in some sort of fight or flight fear. And I think this is certainly scary for that person and their family. And, my dad was a very easy target. He
Hmm.
lived a pretty lavish lifestyle. He was very outspoken. He was a journalist. Both he had his own radio show. He also had a newspaper column in the Pittsburgh Post Gazette. He had ran for political office, so he was very low-hanging fruit at that point. And unfortunately, whenever I was 20, in between jobs, the federal government knocked on my door looking for my father. And I think that was the moment that life certainly changed at that particular point, certainly for the worst for my family, because what followed was just one thing after another that were certainly consequences of that day. And also, me trying to process what that was going to mean, not only for my family, for the restaurant, but for me. And I think in processing what that was going to mean, that kind of helped me. And it was not a smooth process by any stretch of the imagination, nor was it a quick process. It was kind of years in the making and a lot of happenstance meetings, but I was able to pave a new path for myself. And I was able to take myself from this like shy little girl who would, avoid eye contact and talking to anybody, to somebody who didn't mind standing on a stage and being vulnerable and telling my story, because not only was it certainly healing and part of my therapeutic process, but I knew that in doing it, it could be helping somebody else get
Yeah.
through something that they're going through. So that's a long answer to a short question.
No, and it's perfect because one of the things, your dad was very well known.
Yes, very much
And,
so.
famous people would come to the restaurant. I mean, like
Mhm.
this is where you went when you were in the area. And so, unfortunately, I agree with you. The person probably did what they did out of fear and self-preservation. They were like, "Oh, just give us a name and we'll leave you alone." So, and it happens all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry that happened to your family. And there's so much good that your dad did before that happened. From what I understand, he was not easy to work for or with, but he really cared about the people that did work for him, and he instilled a work ethic that a lot of people don't have today.
Yes. And, because of it, I feel like my family and the people that worked at the restaurant are, complete anomalies whenever it comes to the way that we work. We take things so seriously and so passionately. And there's, not a number of hours that you put into something to get a job done. It's the pride that you can look back and say, you know what, I did my absolute best on this. And I would say, we used to joke around when you walked into the kitchen. My dad, and again, this is like before Canva, before any of this, my dad had a picture. People used to call him the two-headed monster, in that he really had these two separate, I'm not even going to say personalities because that's not the right word, but these two separate traits. And the first trait, which was the trait that most people would see and the trait that most of us see the majority of the time, is that he was generous to a default. He gave people the confidence that they didn't even know that they had within themselves to be something greater. He was sort of the ultimate leader in the fact that he gave people credit for his success. Even the dishwashers, he would personally thank people every night after service and say, because of you, we're able to do this. And it wasn't like a BS line, it was something that he truly meant. He would do a roll call before we would even open the doors to the public, and he would sort of ask everybody if they were ready for that night. And, and kind of getting it almost in a way, he kind of grew up in a lot of athletics, and he was a college athlete. So that same sports slash military togetherness mentality, that's certainly what he exuded in the restaurant. And that passion kind of spilled over, and people yearn to want to be around him. They yearn to want to work for him because he, being by him, he made you better because he didn't accept just going through the motions. He wanted you to be passionate about whatever it is that you're doing. And, the flip side of that is that he did have a level of excellence and expectations for people. And if you were not hitting his level of excellence, he had no problem telling you. And not always in a holistic yogi like way. He definitely was known for being a little hot-headed, definitely had a temper, could sort of like fly off the handle quickly. But after it was all said and done, it was over. He didn't take that to the next day. He didn't even take that to the next hour. It was just an explosion. You sort of understood what happened, and that was it. You moved on and you learned from that experience. And so, because of that, when you walked into the kitchen, there was a two-headed monster displayed. And, that's sort of like the inside joke within in the restaurant. But that being said, I will credit my dad and say that every young person and even older person that went through this restaurant program became incredibly successful as an adult. And that maybe wouldn't be saying much if this was a incredibly affluent area. But this right now, if you look up McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania, it is one of the worst neighborhoods within Pennsylvania. The education level, most people that migrated to the Pittsburgh area came during that like World War II time, because they came for the steel mill industry, which is certainly no longer there. And it was a lot of very blue collar workers. It was heavily immigrant migration type of town, lots of Southern Italians, which is what we are, Calabrese people, lots of Polish people, and, a little mix of other ethnicities as well throughout. But most of the people that worked at the restaurant did not have stable father figures, I would say, that were very positive. And my dad stepped into that role gladly. And I think because of that, every single one of those folks are now, uh, state troopers, head of banks, teachers, authors, you name it. Everybody is successful in their own right. And I think that that speaks volumes of the type of boss that my dad was, that he did have this level of care, even whenever he was flying off the handle. He was flying off the handle because he did care so much.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, yeah, the passion. It's interesting, and and he was doing this at a time where, a lot of people don't know their history the way they should, and they don't realize that the populations you're talking about in this community were also very heavily discriminated against at points in this country. Like you couldn't
Yes.
get a loan. So what he was able to do and how he's able to uplift others, and then those other populations that came in that also needed that uplifting were really phenomenal. And so let's kind of talk about you telling his story.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's award winning, right? And of all of the different things, look, there are people out there that go through what your family went through, and they would turn and run, you know, do everything they could to disassociate themselves. That's not what you did. You're like, okay, no, my dad has an amazing story, and we're going to tell this and more. So,
Yeah.
what gave you the courage? I mean, technically, like, you could have just gone with your married name and pretended like none of that was part of your background. What gave you the courage to tell his story and in his voice?
Yeah. So at first, that's exactly what I did is I ran to California, 3,000 miles away where nobody knew my name. And I lived a very sad existence. I would walk down the street and not make contact with people because I thought just by people seeing me that they could tell that something was wrong with me or something was off with me. And I like to bring that up in interviews because I know that there are some people listening that might feel that same way now. As ridiculous as that might sound, that's what I felt at the time. And I know now that certainly by walking down the street and saying hello to somebody, nobody can tell that you have these tiger stripes that you hold. But it seemed so evident to me at that time because I was living it and I was feeling so much guilt and shame, not at all for what my father was accused of, which they hoped to get him as this like big mafioso figure. They couldn't. They got him on tax evasion charges, which if the federal government wants to get you on something and they
They
can
will
find
find a way.
something, they
As
do find a way.
Yeah,
It's
as a
a
former federal employee, I
99.
will I will absolutely validate that. If they really, really want to find some, even if it's just a little bit that they're going to make you pay, and you don't, it doesn't matter. They're going to find something to make their efforts right.
Exactly. And, this was not a short investigation. It was almost 3 years.
Wow.
So that's a lot of time and taxpayer money that was spent investigating something that, in my opinion, really should have been a civil charge, if anything. And, my dad had asked if it could be handled civilly. He was happy to pay the over 3 years. They were saying that he evaded $117,000 worth of tax, which I mean, we have government officials right now that are evading that in one day.
Yeah. Yes. In fact,
So,
and a lot of billionaires too. We did the latest
yeah,
stats just came out, and there are people in this country that paid their companies paid zero,
yeah,
zero.
yeah. And yep, they are not nonprofit organizations by any stretch of the imagination. So, and I'm not saying that he was a perfect bookkeeper. He certainly was not. Did he deserve to go to prison for what he did after all that he did for the community? In my opinion, no. But it was a perfect storm, and it was a time where the Clinton administration had just passed that there were these federal mandates. They're now unconstitutional, but if you did this particular crime at this particular severity, there was a range of time that you needed to serve. But beyond that fact, getting back to your question, I was certainly living and marinating myself in all of that guilt and shame to the point where I was actually in my own little prison in my mind. And sometimes you meet people who allow you to feel comfortable enough sharing what you've went through for a greater good that is not your own. And so my turning point that kind of helped me start this whole writing process and this whole greater healing process was I had went to go see this Catholic nun, Sister Suzanne Jabro, speak in Los Angeles, where I was living at the time. Now, I'm a former Catholic myself. At that time, especially, I had a lot of beef with that particular church. I was not super excited about seeing a nun speak. I had no idea what she was going to say, but that was part of the reason why I wanted to go. And everything that I knew about nuns, I mean, I'm born and raised East Coast girl, right? During the 80s and the through the early 2000s, the nuns that are in my mind are the nuns that, have full habits, the rulers, all the things, if you throw a snowball, you're making 100 outside with no gloves. Like that's the type of vision of nun that I had prior to meeting Suzanne. And whenever Suzanne waltzed into that room in her wedge heeled open toe shoes, where her toenail polish matched her fingers, little fashionista, there was no habit in sight. And she started off her presentation swearing. She was trying to find something that she couldn't find. And I looked at somebody and I said, when is the nun coming on to speak? And she said, that's the nun. And I was like, oh my God, I love this woman. And she was the female version of my father. She told the story about how she started this organization called Get on the Bus, which took children to visit their incarcerated parents. I was so moved by what she had to say that I went up to her afterwards and said, hey, listen, I was not public with my story at the time. I don't know, the words just came out of me. I told her my whole story and she said, we need to be friends. We exchanged information. Long story short, she lost my number. And so we didn't talk for almost 2 years. But then once we got back in touch, whenever I was in grad school, I called her and she was like, oh my gosh, this is divine intervention. I've been searching for you for 2 years. And I, went to this church that, I spoke at that I met you at. Nobody knew you because I was obviously brand new there. And she said, I've searched for you, but you have a very nondescript description in LA. You're at the time a 20 something girl with like brunette hair and blue eyes. And like everybody in that area kind of fit that description. So she said, I couldn't find you. But I started speaking for her. And it was through that I realized the power of storytelling and how that was helping her and her organization get more funding so that she could take more kids to go see their parents. And then I thought to myself, there's definitely this healing element in it for me too. What about for my father? And I knew he had had a very interesting life. He had always said somebody should make a movie about me, which is now something that's happening too,
Just
weirdly enough,
amazing. Yeah.
so many years later. But it really started with conversations and it started with a lot of phone calls. And I noticed that his swagger was gone and his passion for life was gone when that restaurant was sold and went away. So I started slowly taking him back to those days and asking him, silly things like, why did you want to leave a stable job as a postal worker? Whenever I was 4 years old and mom was pregnant with my younger sister Kelly, like who does that in their right mind? You're the only income and your parents didn't come from any money.
Yeah.
My mom actually came from less money. My mom was one of six, and her dad was a truck driver. And her mom actually worked at the time whenever women did not work. And that
Oh,
says something about the
goodness.
the level of poverty that they were at. Although they never realized they were poor, which was really funny. They lived in a two-bedroom house, eight of them, one bathroom. Yeah. And not in a great section of town either. So my parents really kind of took that big risk. And as we sort of dove into the story, that's when I realized that this was less of a family history project, although it was important for family history, more of a historical preservation of Western Pennsylvania history, but culinary and hospitality um, history as well. And so that's really the shift. And that's whenever I started writing the book. I was blessed enough to have a wonderful writing partner who kind of popped into my life at sixth grade and has never left, my former AP English teacher. And she is the same exact age as my father. So the childhood memories, and she grew up in McKees Rocks, which my father did not. He grew up on the other side of the city. So the childhood memories and recollections that we share in the book are all her memories from growing up. And we decided that we needed, through her writing group, they had said that there was one voice that was shouting through the microphone, and that was my dad. And so that's what made our decision to write the story in his voice. And once we made that decision, it became very fun and our writing became very synergistic. And it's hard. I mean, I know for a fact that she wrote the section about McKees Rocks because that was her childhood. I know for a fact that there are certain sections that I wrote, but for most of the book, I can't tell you what she wrote and I can't tell you what I wrote because it was just such a collaborative process for sure.
Which is awesome. It's interesting. People don't realize sometimes the power of that teacher in their life.
Yes, I always, and I speak a lot in classrooms, especially, and it's a different generation now
Yeah.
that we're facing. I'm afraid for the world for a lot of reasons, but I always tell kids, do not disrespect your teacher. Um, Listen to what they have to say because one day you may be working with them and they may be your fellow colleague. And, how awful are you going to feel if you knew that you treated them with such disrespect? So I really do think that, there's no amount of money that we could pay teachers that would be great enough. They are shaping our youth and they do have the power to change people's lives. And in my case, this particular teacher helped me to find my voice. She taught me how to write. And then she taught me how to help to construct this project and into what it has become. And so I'm forever grateful of Ruthie Dimes, now Robbins, for showing me that pathway. And she's a incredible individual and person. And now friend, for sure.
That's amazing. And as we wind down, the book on the rocks, as you mentioned a little bit ago, kind of as in passing, is going to become a movie.
It is, yes, absolutely. We're really excited about that for sure.
Yeah.
So about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, again, you never know where you meet people, right? I met the director of our film in a snowstorm that I was not supposed to be in, but he was being interviewed for his first documentary, which is called Hive, about his very peculiar beekeeper uncle. And we happened to be on the same radio show together. And we met and we started talking, and I really was jiving with some of the things that he was saying, and vice versa. We stayed in contact. He was looking for people to come to his documentary premiere as he was just getting started. I wasn't in Pittsburgh at the time, so I sent my aunt and her boyfriend, who's also a beekeeper. It was a wonderful plant in the audience because, this young director, whenever it came time for Q&A, and nobody raised their hand except for my aunt's boyfriend. And he started the conversation off and really was almost like a plant in the audience for him. That led to a wonderful thank you and a follow on social media. And the two of us sort of followed each other's journey for that next year. And eventually, I reached out to him just for some advice. We had a conversation, and by the end of that hour and a half conversation, it was, instead of you should be doing this, it was we should be doing this. And we signed an agreement back in February of 25. We were in development until the summer of last year, whenever our first investor stepped in. We went into full-fledged production in the fall of 25. We had a production date in October and then two in January. Since then, we now have a total of five investors and one particularly interested person in the wings. And this is, not us reaching out to anybody, people just sort of reaching out because they're engaged with the story. And we've had some pretty big people sign on to the project. Our cinematographer is the same cinematographer, if you watch the History Channel, the show The Food That Built America.
Yes, I
Yes,
do watch that.
that's our cinematographer, and
Oh,
actually the director of that show, if and when we get funding to do historical reenactments, has agreed to direct all the historical reenactments for us as well, because he's local in Pittsburgh and he's incredibly passionate about the project. So it keeps on growing. We're just blessed and along for the ride. And I just show up every day with passion, trying to support not only this book, but now the film, and hopefully soon to be a cookbook in the works as well. And I do that by creating several different food events all throughout the country, mostly centered in the Northeast. And in Pittsburgh, I have a pop-up restaurant as well. And it's just been a wonderful journey, I'm very blessed.
wow. So many different amazing things to draw on. As we wrap this up, there are people that are listening and or watching this particular episode and thinking, wow, how do you bounce back from something like that? Or where do you find the courage? You know, you could have stayed hidden. That's not the path
Mhm.
that was for you any more than the path for your dad was to stay a postal worker. And the number of lives that were impacted by both of you, both for the story he lived and the story you're telling. For someone out there who may be apprehensive to step out of the shadows and do something, what parting advice do you have for them?
The best thing that I can tell you is that you just take your small wins every day. And those small wins, whenever I was really, really depressed and really plagued with like constant panic disorder, those small wins might just be getting out of bed in the morning
Yeah.
and eating breakfast or taking a shower, you know? They don't have to be these big monumental steps. We all have to start from somewhere. And if you can look back on yesterday and say, you know what, I did a little bit more today than I did yesterday. And guess what? Tomorrow you'll do a little bit more. And, nobody expects you to heal from trauma in one day. This process that I'm talking about has taken 20 years. So the person that you're seeing in this seat is very far from the person that started out. The person that started out, I can guarantee you, is either at your level right now or worse off than where you are right now. But it takes time and you have to trudge through the mud a little bit, but know that nothing in life stays the same and it will get better. And weirdly enough, you might be grateful for whatever crappy thing you're going through. Do I want to repeat what I went through? Do I want the government coming into my house whenever I'm home alone as a 20-year-old looking for a family member? Hell no, absolutely not. But am I grateful that that happened? In a weird way, yes, because without that, there's no this. There's no this. There's no movie. There's maybe at best a Wikipedia page that five people in the history of, the next 100 years may happen upon. So that's the difference. So find the gratitude in the pain and the sorrow, even when it's hard, because it's there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here, for telling your story, your dad's story, uh, your teacher's story, the nun story. I mean, I can't wait to see this. And like I said, yes, the food that built America, like when you turn your TV on, you had the little menu shows up at the bottom of what you watch, and there it is, right in there with the other things that I watch. So, um, for those of you who have never seen that, you can check that out too. It's a lot of fun. And very fascinating for those of you who are interested in just the history of it. So many things we're not taught. Um, in terms of reaching out to you, your for our audience, all of the contact information for Maria is going to be included in the links below wherever you're accessing this show. But for those who are listening verbally in the moment, what is one of the easiest ways for people to reach you?
The easiest way is just to go onto my website. It's just my name, Maria C, like cat, Palmer, Palmer.com. And that's going to have all my social media handles, email, any way that you need to, all the events, the media stuff, this show included, will be on that link. So anything that you need to reference, it's all there. There's probably too much there because one of my skills is not web design.
Okay. No, we're not worried about perfection. We're worried about excellence. And this is an excellent story for anybody who just wants to know about history and struggle and redemption. And, you know, there's so many different aspects to this story that I suspect a lot of people can relate to some part of, if not more than what we would hope. Um, so thank you for telling it. Thank you for helping your dad's voice come through at a very
Thank
important
you.
time in our history as a country. And so we'll have to have you back when the movie comes out.
Oh my gosh, I would love
That
that.
would be
Yeah.
awesome. That would be
Yeah. And we can
awesome.
get the director and the producer,
Okay,
they'll
that would
come
be
on too. I've been doing some different, local TV and different things with them recently too. So that's always an option for a part due as well.
awesome. Thank you again, Maria, for coming on today. And again, her book, On the Rocks, soon to be an Academy Award winning movie. Shall we put that out in the universe while we're
Yeah.
at it? Awesome. Thank you again for joining us today. And for all of you who are tuning in, thank you. You know, we have amazing guests, as you can obviously tell. And we really, really appreciate in a world where there's so many things that you can view and or listen to that you choose to support this podcast. And if you find this information useful, please share it with someone else so that they can also benefit from the amazing experiences and lessons learned from our guests. And always remember, whether you're looking to make changes in your life, no matter how big or small, you can keep tuning in for more illuminating, informational, and inspiring conversations with guests like Maria, who overcame whatever challenges lay ahead of them to find their purpose and to live it.